So South Africans await the outcome of the Government of National Unity talks. The DA and the ANC hinted at a possible expansion to municipal level, particularly at hung municipalities. Let's expand this further now. And for this conversation, I'm joined by political analyst from the University of Johannesburg, Professor Oscar van Heerden. Professor van Heerden, appreciate your time this evening. Can you explain the key components of the GNU agreement between the ANC and DA and how it aims to impact local governance?
Yeah, good evening, Hugo, and to your viewers. You know, the reality is that the statement of intent has got a number of clauses. Some of them are dealing with what is the intent of the GNU. In other words, we agree on wide parameters, that it's a constitutional democracy, that we will operate within the law, that we will be courteous and respectful, and so on and so forth. And then a second component of the statement of intent deals with how do we make decisions. They talk of sufficient consensus, they talk of 60%, they talk of we must first try and convince each other, and so on. And then another component deals with when we disagree and there is deadlock, how do we break that deadlock? So those are sort of broadly what is encapsulated in the agreement. The truth of the matter is that there are all sorts of debates going on, Hugo, because ultimately, technically, there has not yet been the formation of a GNU because cabinet has not been announced. You need to have all the components in place in order to say that now we have constituted government. And that is part of the technicality. Also, there's disagreement about the 60% in terms of consensus, sufficient consensus, and so forth. Now, the negotiations is at a stage where there is quibbles about how many positions should be given to which parties, which portfolios should be given to which parties, and of course, how do we accommodate the other partners in the multi-party coalition government, such as the IFP, the PA, Good, Rise, and so on and so forth. So that's the delicate point that we are at now. And then unfortunately, some of the parties are now taking these negotiations, which is happening behind closed doors, into the public domain by leaked letters and so on and so forth.
Professor, I'd like us to rewind a little bit and focus on that statement of intent, which came out very, very quickly, if you will. I mean, there was little time wasted in coming up with a letter of intent. Should more time have been spent on drafting this letter of intent and clearing any grey areas, because it's not all black and white? I mean, we've talked about sufficient consensus. What does sufficient consensus mean? I mean, there's already debate. It seems that there's so much that is grey and is not clear cut. And surely more time should have been spent on coming up with a statement of intent that potentially would have paved way for a cabinet already.
No, I hear you, but unfortunately, the timeframes are dictated to by the Constitution. Remember, it is a constitutional provision that as soon as the results of the elections is announced, then the President and Speaker of the House of the Assembly needs to be elected within a certain time frame. Then there is also when the inauguration must happen, that's within a time frame. And then, of course, there is the issue of now having to announce cabinet. So because of those time pressures, I think that's why the statement of intent went through such a quick process. But I do want to say that if you look at it closely, a lot of thinking has gone into the statement of intent. They cover, as I say, the broad parameters. There's a few niggly points here and there that there's disagreement. But remember, Hugo, there's also in the statement, it also says that one of the first things after government has been formed is for the parties bound by the agreement or the statement to have a lekgotla. And in that lekgotla is where they are going to flesh out more of the statement, more of the clauses, and so on, because, as you say, there wasn't necessarily sufficient time to conclude it.
Now, because the experience that this government has in GNUs is limited to one such occasion, three decades ago and a little more. Did it suffice? Was there consultation beyond the two main parties in the statement of intent? Did they seek further consultation?
Yeah, I remember the ANC, after much deliberations and consternation, took a decision that they are going to form a government of national unity, and they are inviting all parties in. I think we need to dispel this notion that there was already an agreement between the ANC and the DA, and only then did they invite smaller parties in. This is not how the situation unfolded. The situation was that the party that received the majority votes in the elections, in this case the ANC at 40%, is the one, and also the current governing party. It is the party that then decided what options are open to them. They could go into a minority government, and was that going to be feasible? They could say, no, we think now that there's a hung assembly or government that we should return to the polls, etc. But they opted for what they call a government of national unity, which in effect is a multi-party coalition government. And so they invited everyone in. As you know, MK, Mkhonto Sizwe party, was very clear that they are not going to entertain anything with the ANC unless Cyril Ramaphosa is not part of those negotiations, and that was a red line for the ANC. Similarly, with the EFF, they said that there's no way they are going to go into any government with the DA being part of it. And so by virtue of those two issues, those two parties decided not to be part of the GNU. And other parties then slowly but surely started coming on board. That's really what happened. And so when there is any negotiations, you know, people make a big thing in the media and elsewhere that there's these negotiations between the ANC and the DA, which indeed is true. But at the same time, parallel with that, the ANC is also talking to all the other parties in terms of what it is that they want, what is it that how they can be accommodated, far removed from the conversation only with the DA.
Professor Oscar van Heerden, political analyst, University of Joburg. Appreciate your time this evening.